Let's talk about Iowa while we're here. So Monday is the Iowa caucuses. I listen, caucuses are dumb. It's going to be especially insane this Monday because it's supposed to be like the coldest day in Iowa in years, like negative, I don't know, 50 wind chill, whatever it is. I do not like the idea of forcing people to stand in person at like a school gym to cast their primary vote. It was dumb when Democrats did it too, and I'm glad they're not doing it anymore forever. But Republicans are doing that on Monday to pick their primary candidate. So right now, it's Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, for some reason, is still in it. And I'm sure a couple also rans were all there too. Trump is going to run away with this thing. And that is wild because the reason, like the lore for people who haven't followed politics, the whole thing about Iowa is that this is a state that, if you're the Republican Party, it really caters to white evangelical Christians. If you want to win in Iowa, you got to get in good with that crowd. And who is less interested in white evangelicals and their beliefs than Donald Trump? And yet he's going to crush everybody because Republicans are in a cult. And there was an article this week in the New York Times that kind of looked at the influence of Christians in Iowa and how that's changed over time. Because we've long known, and we all know this if you follow politics, white evangelicals are more motivated to go to the polls than pretty much any other religious demographic. I wish atheists vote a lot too, but non-religious Americans, we do not punch above our weight relative to the population. You know, a smaller percentage of nuns vote than exist, but a higher percentage of white evangelicals vote than exist in the country. Percentage, not raw numbers, but percentage. And so in Iowa, what is the thing to do if you want white evangelicals to come caucus for you? You got to go to bat on right-wing issues. That means talking about abortion rights. That means talking about how horrible LGBTQ people are. That means today it might mean we got to ban all the books, whatever it is. And you're never going to talk about like whatever Jesus cared about. You're not going to talk about helping the poor, helping the least of these, helping marginalized people, helping refugees. No. You do culture wars. That's how you win as a Republican in Iowa. But it seems like that is failing these days. Why? Because evangelical Christians are no longer defined by, we're very passionate about the pro-life cause. It's not about what they're for. It's definitely not about Jesus because it's never been about Jesus. It's all about who they hate. It's always been about who they hate, but now it's kind of front and center. And now they have a guy there who hates all the same people, who tells them who they should hate, and they're all just getting on board. And what's weird about that is that there is a candidate who his whole shtick is playing up the culture wars. That's all Ron DeSantis has been doing in Florida. Like, he has been fighting those battles in Florida. I mean, I hate it. It's depressing as hell, but that is what he's known for. And Ron DeSantis talks about his religious faith. Granted, he's Catholic and not white evangelical, but whatever. He talks about faith the way you would expect any white evangelical candidate to talk about faith. And by the way, Ron DeSantis has also been embraced by the evangelical leaders in the state. The guy in Iowa who is kind of known as the kingmaker among evangelicals is a guy named Bob Vander Plaats. And Vander Plaats has he's endorsed, like, not necessarily the person leading in the polls going up to the caucuses, but for the past 3 caucuses, he said, I like this person, I like that person. And they always win because he gets white evangelicals to vote the way he tells them to. And Bob Vander Plaats said, I'm endorsing Ron DeSantis because he's the culture war guy. He's the guy who talks about religion. And guess what's happening? No one cares. People do not like Ron DeSantis, even Republicans in Iowa. And Donald Trump, who doesn't give a shit about any of this stuff, but he'll do whatever he thinks he has to do to win, he has riled up his base in a way Jesus never could. How? By exploiting white evangelicals' biggest fears. So the fact that white evangelicals are flocking to Trump, even though Ron DeSantis would advance an almost identical agenda with, honestly, without a lot of that baggage, they just don't care. And it tells you a lot about how these people belong to a cult. It tells you how much Christianity really means to them. It doesn't. Definitely not as much as it used to, right? Like, I've always said this, I know I'm not alone in this. Jesus has always been an excuse that a lot of conservatives use to cover up their own bigotry. It's a lot easier for them to say, oh, I'm a faith based voter. I want to do what Jesus would do. And that is why I hate gay people. Like, it's a lot easier to say that than to skip the first part and just say, let me tell you who I hate, because that sounds bad. But honestly, today, they are totally skipping the Jesus justification. They just like the Trump guy who sprinkles God into his messaging, but he knows he doesn't care. And so let me show you this article in the New York Times, because some of the quotations they had were just wild. Let me pull this up here for a second. Here we go. This is the headline. Trump is connecting with a different kind of evangelical voter. That's putting it lightly. He's connecting with bigots. That's who he's connecting with. And people who just, they were always faking it about Jesus. And this lady they talked to here, her name is Karen Johnson. This is the quotation I loved. Trump is our David and our Goliath, Miss Johnson said recently as she waited outside a hotel in eastern Iowa to hear the former president speak. Really? He's our David and our Goliath? Like, does she know that Goliath is the bad guy in that story? Has she read the Bible? Has she read the first book of the Bible? I don't know. That's a weird thing to say from a Christian. Because if she said Trump is our David, meaning he's our underdog who will exceed expectations, okay, I get what you're trying to say. To say he's our Goliath, that's basically saying, yeah, he's the dumb big guy who just goes around with violence as his only, his only tool. And to be fair, she's kind of right. But you can't have it both ways. You got to pick a side there. What are you doing? So that's a strange thing for a Christian in Iowa to say, but it didn't stop there. This is another passage. This is actually at the end of the article, but I thought it was pretty telling. Look at this. At Mr. Trump's rally in Coralville, it was Joel Tenny, a 27-year-old local evangelist who does not lead a church, who delivered the opening prayer. Doesn't matter that he's young. Doesn't matter that he doesn't lead a church. He's a Trump guy. He's a MAGA guy. Okay. The crowd responded tepidly to his impassioned recitation of several Bible verses. They did not care. But the rallygoers roared to life when he set aside the scripture and told them what they had come to hear. When Donald Trump becomes the 47th president of the United States, there will be retribution against all those who have promoted evil in this country. Jesus. So when he talks about Jesus, no one cares. They're totally bored. But when he talks about let's get revenge on our enemies, they love it. They love that Donald Trump is going to get revenge on their behalf, because that's the thing that motivates these white evangelicals. It's never the Bible. It's never Jesus. You know what I mean? So just bananas people. This is another anecdote from the same article. Again, it's not making fun of all of Iowa, but it is pointing out that these people are not motivated by what a lot of pundits thought they were motivated by. In the farming communities of Calhoun County, for instance, church adherence fell 31% from 2010 to 2020, the steepest decline in the state, even as 80% of the population continued to identify in surveys as white Christians. More than 70% of the county's voters cast ballots for Trump in 2020. And let's just pause there for a second. 80% of the population voted for Trump. 80% of white evangelicals voted for Trump in 2020 and 2016. 80% of Iowans say they are white Christians in Iowa. And yet, a lot of them have stopped going to church. A lot of them have stopped going to church. What does that mean? Here's what that looks like in practice. I voted for Trump twice and I'll vote for him again, said some lady. He's the only savior I see. Not Jesus, Trump. Trump is the only savior I see. Raised as a Baptist, Miss Hatfield no longer attends church. I just try to do right, she said. I pray to God every night. I mean, I'm not that old, but I remember a time when if you said, I'm a Christian, but I don't go to church, they would say, you're not really a Christian then. Like, think about this of what are the ways you define what it means to be an evangelical Christian? There are famously a handful of things you have to accept in order to really be called an evangelical. You have to believe Jesus was resurrected. You have to believe like you can only, access God through Jesus. You have to believe in evangelizing others. That's a big part of what it means to literally be an evangelical. And these days, even church attendance doesn't seem to make a difference for these people. Like these people are just using religious language to describe their bigotry. It seems like evangelical Christian, and this is a trend a lot of people who study this stuff have been saying. Evangelical Christian now tells you more about your politics than your theology. It is hard for demographers to say, this is what evangelical Christians, white evangelical Christians specifically, here's what they have in common theologically, because they could be all over the place on religion. But if you tell them who are you voting for, you're going to find a pretty good consensus. Being evangelical these days tells you what kind of conspiracies you believe in, which groups you falsely think are persecuting you, what filter bubble you prefer, what TV channels you watch. They are not interested as much in fighting traditional right-wing issues, even things like abortion. This is something another evangelical in the article pointed out that, again, I found it fascinating to read this. Abortion policy is one thing I don't really stress, said Joanne Sweeting, who pulled her 8th grade son out of school to attend a Trump rally. Since when has an evangelical Christian ever said, yeah, abortion, I don't really care about it. It's not a thing I spend a lot of time thinking about. When has that ever happened? But it's happening because Trump proved what the critics have been saying about evangelicals forever. They're not motivated by a sincere religious devotion to these causes. They're bound by who they hate. And Trump brings it out in them. And Ron DeSantis, who is one of their guys, has failed to notice that. I don't know what he's doing, but it's not working. The irony here is that if Donald Trump did like an about face and said he supports abortion rights because he thinks that's good for his reelection, what do you think these white evangelicals would do? Do any of you seriously think they would ditch him, or would they still vote for Trump? And I think most of them would still vote for Trump because, again, they don't actually care about the issues. They care about vengeance. They like Trump more than they hate abortion. And so that's a thing to keep in mind. I mentioned Bob Vander Plaats, the evangelical kingmaker whose endorsement used to matter. Bob Vander Plaats has, in the past, he backed Mike Huckabee in 2008 against Barack Obama later. Mike Huckabee won the Iowa caucuses that year, and then he fizzled out. In 2012, when Mitt Romney later won the Republican primary, Bob Vander Plaats supported Rick Santorum. Remember him? Rick Santorum won the Iowa caucuses that year. It was a big deal at the time for like a day. And in 2016, Vander Plaats supported Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz won the Iowa caucuses that year. So I'm saying, like, none of those guys ended up being the Republican nominee, but they won Iowa. And this year, Vander Plaats is backing Ron DeSantis, and Ron DeSantis is going to get crushed in Iowa, which means Bob Vander Plaats, no one cares what he has to say anymore. He's not the dude that evangelicals care about because they're not going to him for advice. They're just asking Trump, sir, with a tear in their eye, who should I be voting for? Oh, you? Okay, done. And again, I know I've pointed this out before. Donald Trump is not their dude. He is the least comfortable guy in a church. He famously used a Bible as a prop in front of a church. He tells evangelicals what they want to hear. Why is this happening? Because he gave them the right-wing judges they wanted on the Supreme Court, and now they're all taking victory laps, right? By the way, any other Republican would have done the same thing, but none of these Christians care about Trump's criminal indictments. They don't care about the Hitler-esque rhetoric or the way Trump adores international fascists like Kim Jong-un, the selfishness, the greed, the embrace of ignorance. This is a passage in that New York Times article that just summarizes where all this is going. Here we go. Being evangelical once suggested regular church attendance, a focus on salvation and conversion, and strongly held views on specific issues such as abortion. Today, it is as often used to describe a cultural and political identity, one in which Christians are considered a persecuted minority, traditional institutions are viewed skeptically, and Mr. Trump looms large. I think that gets to the heart of it. They want the power. They want Trump. They want the bigotry. They want this guy fighting their battles because even they kind of know it looks bad when they do it, you know? Interestingly enough, in a different article, someone said Bob Vander Plaats's endorsement of Ron DeSantis, according to Trump's campaign team, they said to each other, this is going to have, quote, no significant impact on the presidential ballot. This is from, I believe, an Associated Press article about the upcoming caucus. Like, it's just not really going to help him out at all. So again, it just tells you a lot about how far down they've come. I mean, I guess none of this makes Trump look good. If evangelical Christians in Iowa think their endorsement of Trump, their Trump winning in Iowa on Monday, if they think that's going to help Trump look good, it will not. It just makes Jesus look bad. Little Nas X makes Jesus look better than these people and Donald Trump. Like, if there's any silver lining to any of this, it's that switching from worshiping Jesus to worshiping Trump, it pushes out a lot of decent people, especially young people, from these churches, from organized religion entirely. And I mean, the downside of that is you're losing the moderating voices so that what's left, it's a smaller piece of the pie, but they're even more extreme. That's what's scary. But when Trump wins on Monday, I think it'll prove what critics of Christian nationalism have been saying for so many years. These Republicans were never values voters like they always like to claim they were. They were conservatives who used religion as a weapon to hurt their enemies. And now that they found someone who speaks their real language, they're just going to start ditching all the religious stuff that they never cared about anyway. That's the future of white evangelical Christianity.